promised me that you'd all be dark, and you're all mostly dark. So this is great. This is exactly what I'm looking for. So we're going to talk today about what it means to lead in a post-boom world. So let's get started. Did it go? It's not go. There we go. I see a lot of this these days. A lot of anxiety, a lot of stress, a lot of angst. Kind of how I feel right now. But generally speaking, I see this pretty much in everyone, right? I don't need to tell anyone here that we're living kind of in some challenging times, right? We have finished a remarkable 12 years of unabated growth. And yet, here we are on the downside of that. So I promised in this abstract that I would talk about what the folks in the rooms were thinking. A little bit of hubris. I'm not a mind reader, but this is what I think that most people are thinking. And if I'm wrong, feel free afterwards in the Q&A to tell me what you're thinking. But overall, I feel like the tenor of everyone's thoughts today are, wow, this job just got really, really hard. I'm working more. My team is disgruntled. It's not my team. My partner teams are disgruntled. I'm now an untrained therapist instead of a technical expert. And I'm doing 15 more things than I was doing before, most of the time for less recognition and definitely for less pay. So this is true, and this is what we're all experiencing. And you're not crazy. This is hard. And it's even harder for you as leaders, right? You have an extra responsibility to help your teams as well as yourself. So this is hard, and it's also a little scary. 12 years is a long time for an upswing. But I'm here to tell you that, more importantly, this is normal. So let's stop, take a moment, have a collective breath. Let's do that right now, right? Everyone breathe in. Just be happy I didn't ask you to scream as loud as you could for 5 minutes, because that would have been a very different thing. Breath's better. I'm just here to assure you that this is okay and this is normal. And we are in the throes of a very, very natural occurrence. Markets go up and markets goes down. And this has happened many, many times before, and it's going to happen again. So in this talk today, what I'm hoping to do is provide you with a little bit of context, some perspective on our current status quo. And then we're going to have some deeper dives into what actually has changed, right? It's one thing to say things are different now, but we're going to try to identify some of those things. And then last, I'm hoping to help you understand that this is an awesome opportunity to become better leaders, right? For today and in the future. What does effective leadership look like now? So let's get started with this perspective. So we're going to go through a history of big tech. This history is a little different. We're not going to talk about like the rise of the iPod or social media or streaming services. We're going to talk about the history of boom-bust cycles in big tech. So we'll start with the first one. In the beginning, there was the dot-com crash of 2000 to 2002. So raise your hands, any of you who were around in the industry during that time. Oh, thank God, I'm not the only one. Okay, yes, all right. So for those of you who aren't as familiar, basically, the dot-com bust kind of refers to a period between the late 90s and early 2000s where a substantial number of internet companies basically collapsed. And this was brought about because of excessive speculation and overvaluation of those companies' stocks. They drove those stocks straight up, and, people couldn't actually live up to that. So when those companies failed to deliver, basically, most of them went out of business. The market completely crashed. So this kind of revealed a disparity between market expectations and the actual profitability and sustainability of what these companies could do. So as brutal as this was, and it was brutal for the people who raised their hands, they probably remember that. Let's try to take a glass half full viewpoint here. because there are many companies that came out of that time that are big industry giants today. So Google, Salesforce, and even Amazon. Small side note, Amazon is kind of where I enter the picture. Amazon laid off 1,300 people in their workforce in June of 2001, and I actually ended up joining Amazon in August of 2002, which I think is very much a direct result of what happened there. So sometimes there's opportunity in change. So if we fast forward 5 years to our next bust, we kind of get to the global financial crisis of 2007 or 2009, aka the Great Recession. Pretty much in every country it was called that but ours, and you might know it by the housing market collapse. So how many of you were around in the industry during this time? Oh, more. Okay, nice. So this was pretty much brought about by, the bursting of the housing bubble in the United States. Now, it's incredibly complex what happened here. I really encourage you to read or watch The Big Short by Michael Lewis. He does a great job of explaining it. But long story short, it is yet again another situation where market values and stocks were pushed up, this time tied to the housing market, and it just wasn't sustainable. So when the bubble actually burst, it basically caused many, many financial institutions to collapse. Credit markets froze, nobody could borrow any money, and it kind of brought about a severe global downturn. So this wasn't localized to big tech, unlike the dot-com crash. This was kind of everybody. And there were some companies in big tech that were okay. But generally speaking, they were definitely all impacted, right? Consumers spent less, which impacted demand. And then companies spent less, delaying enterprise purchases and investments. And some companies actually ended up laying people off. So while the outcome for all of tech in general was a mixed bag, it still definitely impacted us. And if we were to, again, take our glass half full, we could see that there were, yet again, other companies that rose out of this period of time, like Uber and Airbnb and Venmo. So this brings us up to date to now. 12 years later, we're in our current situation, right? COVID pandemic of 2020 to 2021. I have a question mark because I feel like I'm not sure it's actually done. So, AKA the Great Lockdown. So raise your hand for how many of you have lived through this. No, it's a trick question. Everyone's hand should be raised, right? We're in it. We're in it right now. So this one is so fascinating to me. But basically, everybody was locked in their homes, right? This great lockdown is what happened. Everyone was home, and basically this heralded a remarkable shift towards online services, right? As demand for people locked in their houses grew. And a lot of big tech said, oh my goodness, we gotta hire everybody because everyone's home. And everyone will never leave their houses again. I don't know why they thought that, but that's okay. Because the moment people could go outside, everything changed, right? Demand dropped, slowed down. And we're in it now. That's what we're witnessing right now, is this reversal of kind of intention and demand and what have you. So we're still playing this out, right? There's been 194,000 layoffs this year already. And I started to write down to add a slide that was going through each of the companies that I had mentioned before. And then I thought, you get it. You get the point. I don't need to belabor it. So in our glass half full viewpoint, who will rise out of these ashes? Well, we don't know yet because we're still playing it out. Smart money's probably on an AI company, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. So you're probably asking, why did I take you through this history lesson? The point of this was to try to provide some perspective that all of this has happened before and all of it will happen again. This is just kind of how markets work. And as scary and hard as it is, we actually have an opportunity now to figure out kind of how to lead in this time, so that the next time we're here, it won't be as surprising. So if this is your first time making this transition, for the people who didn't raise their hand for the first two busts, I thought it'd be useful for us to talk through a little bit more specifically what has changed, okay? So when I started this talk, I wanted to get a sense of what are those big areas. And there's a lot of abstract things, right? And I'm sure stuff is localized to your specific company. But generally speaking, I think there are some hot areas that most of us could relate to. So the first one is motivating teams, motivating oneself, right? Everyone's super freaked out. The North Star has turned upside down. We don't actually really know what's valuable or not anymore. Hiring. Hiring has always been hard in tech, okay? It's just really differently hard now, and I'm really excited to talk about that when we get to it. It's very costly now in a really different way than it was before. And then less opportunities, period, less opportunities for growth for you, for your people. You know, it's harder to hop from company to company anymore if you just wanted to look for something new. So if we kind of zoom in a little bit, let's start with the first one. For motivation, during the boom time, right, it was easy. It was easy to motivate people, especially if you were someone who was extrinsically motivated, right? You had a lot of financial incentives to offer your employees. Excuse me. You could throw money at the problem, right? You have high salaries, you have bonuses, you could have promotions, very tangible external things. But post-boom, right, money's tight. I can't speak for every company, but, you know, whereas in my current organization where, you know, raises were very common, now they're very few percentage of people who are getting pay raises, right? So there's less financial incentives to offer across the board, less promotions, companies are consolidating, they're getting smaller, however that's happening. So you could also, in the boom time, offer more interesting work, right? Greenfield was way more prevalent. We had a lot of strategy bets in 2020. I actually ended up leaving a role that I had been in for 4 years to move to another part of the business to work on a number 3 strategy bet for Netflix and animation, right? And so, because at the time, the thought was, well, if we stay in this lockdown for a long period of time, animation is a lot easier to make than having to put out productions, right? So that was a strategy bet they went for. It was an interesting time. That's another story. But my point is there were a lot of these opportunities that abounded. Well, post-boom, not so much. Everything has tightened up. Companies have slowed down investments in new strategic areas, and you're probably doing a lot more maintenance work than you were before as people try to figure it out and see where the winds are blowing. During the boom, we had a super healthy job market, right? If you wanted to move on to some other place, if your first job wasn't cutting it, you just went and got another one, you know. And post-boom, we're in an extremely competitive job market. There's not a lot of roles, and then those roles have, in some cases, hundreds of people applying for them. So that is a very different world. Speaking of job market, this kind of leads us into the hiring conundrum. Oops, wrong way. In short, as I've kind of detailed, during the boom, it was an employee's market, right? We held all of the cards. Post-boom, it's a company market. You know, when I was going through the rehearsal of this, I was like, oh God, this is so depressing. But it's okay. It's fine. It'll swing around again. Don't worry. But it is true, right? It is true to just acknowledge that, like, it is a company market, right? And so maybe we have to hustle a little more than we had to before, right? In the boom, again, we had tons of choices in employers, and now we don't. But the other thing that I think is kind of insidious is the fact that the cost of hiring has absolutely increased. And I'm not talking about the money cost of hiring. I'm talking about the cost of what happens if you get it wrong, right? Now, if you hire someone and they're not a good candidate, like that mediocre or potentially bad employee, like the wrong hire reverberates through the organization, right? You may not be able to replace them. There's no guarantee that if you get rid of them that you'll be able to replace them. If you keep them and bad employees end up affecting team morale. Now you have a much bigger problem on your hands. And all of this basically will make you potentially way more conservative and less likely to take risks on candidates who would be excellent at the job but are just bad at interviewing. Because interviewing's hard and it's a skill, right? It's not a science. And now all of a sudden you have to think really long and hard about what you're doing. And I think that's pretty sad. But all of this to say, this is our new normal, okay? All of this post-beam is what we're dealing with now. But everything I've tried to kind of talk about is to prepare us for the fact that surviving and thriving in this new normal kind of requires us to shift gears from managing with a lot of support to actually leading. We are in a time of leadership. That is what's required. It's time to put on your leadership hat. And the difference between leadership and management, that's a whole other talk, which I'm happy to also give you some links to when this is done. But for this talk, I found one quote that I thought summed it up really well. And this is from Grace Hopper. You don't manage people, you manage things. You lead people. That's what your people need you to do right now, is to lead them. And as a part of that leadership, there's never been a more important time to have a plan for your organization or your team or your company, okay? How you hire, how you grow yourself, how you grow your people. That all must be sorted out proactively right now. No one's going to do it for you, and we kind of can't wait for things to right themselves. We got to drive the bus. So with that framing of leadership and trying to make a plan, I thought it would be useful for me to offer some tactical things that you could do around some of the stuff we've been talking about. So starting with hiring, this first bullet is very near and dear to my heart, right? Be more intentional. And what I mean is, in big companies especially, right, depending on where you are, you might be very removed from the hiring process. When I worked at Disney, I basically didn't see any candidates until I was basically queuing up for an interview. I didn't see their resume before then. I didn't do any of the resourcing or sourcing for them. I didn't provide any bullet points of what I was looking for. Just stuff happened, magic Disney elves happened, and then I had to go to a meeting, right? And then when I went to Netflix, they were like, "You own the whole thing. Let us know how it goes," right? It's like completely different. But it was a gift, actually, as stressful as it is, because I'm not a recruiter, but still, it was a gift because it forced me to be more intentional. And what I mean here is you have to understand your team composition in the bigger picture, right? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? Right? What do they bring to the table? How do they move your charter forward? Whatever that is. You got to write it down. And I think even more importantly is you want to bring the team along with you. Don't just kind of do it in a vacuum. So one of the things I like to do with my teams, especially when I'm hiring, is I run this exercise called a Superpowers. I don't know if anyone's ever used it. With Side Partners, a little app you can download. And everyone does it ahead of time. And then we sit and we talk about it as a team. And the purpose of it is, on the one hand, it helps them understand their strengths and weaknesses and where they fit in the greater team. On the second, it helps them realize, what are our gaps, right? What are we missing? So when I ran the animation team, we were starting from scratch. It was a completely bootstrapped org. And I realized when we did this exercise that I did a great job hiring a lot of people who understood how to build platforms from scratch, right? That we had great gap analysis people, great systems thinkers, great pattern matchers, some empathy, because, that's important. But you know what we were missing? We were missing people who knew how to evangelize what we were doing. And that became really clear the moment we did that exercise. It's like, oh, we can build all this stuff, but if there's no one who can go out into the organization and kind of get people to use it, it's kind of pointless. So this is the kind of intentionality I'm talking about. And the last bullet here is the best as you can, because I know sometimes, like Disney, right? I didn't have a choice. Try not to rely on generic hiring templates. Use them for what they're meant to be, maybe a standardizing on the technical. But every team is different, and what every team needs is different. And if you're intentional and you understand what it is your team needs, then you can actually intervene in making sure you get the right hire for your role. So talking about growth and that lack of opportunity for your people. We'll talk about your growth in a minute, but I think you should lean into transparency. I don't think you should sugarcoat what's happening in the market or in the industry or in your company. I don't think you should fall apart in front of your people either, but I think you should call a spade a spade. The reality is everyone's freaked out, and I think there's a lot of power in acknowledging that, yeah, this is different, and that's okay. We'll get through it. So lean into transparency, and then also recognize that there are more ways to motivate people than money. Now, I don't want to get into the debate of whether or not you should just be passionate about your job, right? We all do things, we have skills, we should be paid for them, right? So that's not at all what I'm advocating. But I think I've met very few straight mercenaries in my life, I'll just put it that way, okay? So you have to work with the levers that you have. And this is so hard, right? Because so much of the industry and so much of I guess, big business and period, right, is value is derived by salary, right? But there are other things that we need to do and other things that drive us. So you have to figure out what that is for your people, right? You have to engage them in conversations. There's no more drive-by one-on-ones, at least until you get an answer to this, and then, do what you want. But you have to dig in, right, to get to the crux. So I have an engineer that I manage who was very upset that they didn't get promoted, right? And they should have been promoted. They absolutely have the skill set and the visibility and the technical acumen that they needed for that role. Unfortunately, there were no promos that were really happening. And it was a tough conversation, and we had to have a lot of conversations about, okay, but what does this mean to you, right? And what I was able to suss out was that they were so upset about it because for them it was the single most thing that showed their value to the organization. And there's no shade, that's tough, right? We all derive value in lots of things. So I couldn't get that person a promotion, but I sure could figure out how to show that they were valuable across lots of different avenues, right? Giving them more responsibility that they wanted, by the way, I didn't just dump it on them, right? Giving them visibility, pushing them out there, and so is that going to solve the problem forever? Are they going to continue working for me for 5 years? No, but for the time being, it addressed the issue and got them motivated again. And so the last thing I would say here is be creative with finding opportunities. I think a lot of people underestimate how much opportunity already exists where you are, right? Opening comes up on your team and everyone thinks, gotta hire. Well, what if, someone 3 teams over from you actually has the skill set that you need and they're not being grown in their other team? It's a win-win. You need to be talking to your colleagues and your peers, right, to find out what's available. You sit at a different altitude, right, and so you should be able to see further across the organization and figure out, hey, you got to be a little selfless, right? And figure out exactly how you can find these avenues for your people to grow. This year alone, I have actually moved 3 people off of the team I directly manage to other teams in the org that I run. And some of them have been with me for a long time through multiple teams. Okay, so it's not just this one. But I moved them for 2 reasons. One, those other teams needed the skills that they provided, and they were already broken in, so to speak, right? Because they were in the company. And secondly, I could not give them the growth that they were looking for. Like, we had a very siloed set of work, and it wasn't going to grow. And so if I wanted to offer them those opportunities, I had to go find them elsewhere. So last but not least, let's talk about your growth, right? This is a perfect time to learn new skills. What could you be better at? Or what are you good at that you could get great at? The point is to kind of intentionally invest in yourself, whatever that looks like. There's this exercise that I learned about this year that I started doing. Instead of a goal-setting exercise, it's called a fear-setting exercise. And you can find it online. Tim Ferriss is an odd duck. He does it. And you pick one thing that you're like absolutely afraid of. Like, what is the thing you're avoiding, right? So, for example, I could say, I'm afraid that I'm going to get up on stage and make a mockery of myself or something. That would be the one thing. And then he has a series of exercises that you do to kind of investigate that fear. And at the end of it, I won't get into all of it, but at the end of it, what you've basically done is kind of wrote a plan, right, for how you're going to address like that stuff. And it really just de-emphasizes a lot of the anxiety. So I like this in the context of work as well, from thinking through how am I going to organizationally deal with the challenges we have. That's one thing you can do, but you all know what you need to do to grow yourselves. The second thing is network. Too often, I think many of us introverts in tech underestimate the value of expanding our networks. And I don't mean transactional, just like, Pokemon, got to catch them all. I mean, like, truly building relationships with people. I have been in all 3 of these boom-bust cycles, and I have survived them because I've had a really strong network. So I would encourage you to think about the people that you work with today. Who do you want to be in your next company? Who have you worked with in the past that you would love to work with again? Right? How do you cultivate a network that's rich and diverse and full of people who don't just do what you do or look like you, right? This is what's going to kind of help buffer and support you through all of these ups and downs. For yourselves, same bullet point, look for internal opportunities, right? Like, there are things that are there. Go to your leadership, talk to them, have growth conversations if you're not already having them, and ask them explicitly to help you find other opportunities. I actually spent my first 4 years at Netflix running a front-end UI team, and then I moved to the animation space, and I ran a back-end team because that was the only place I was going to get opportunities to grow. Of course, now we're full circle because I run a full stack team, so I feel like I got the best of both worlds, but you have to be proactive about looking for this. And then the last one here, extra special for you all, you got to know where the business is going. What is your business doing? What are the 3 most important objectives that you guys have for the next year? Where does your team fit into those objectives, right? And you need to understand that for 2 reasons. One, you'll always be able to answer the question of what value you're providing to the business if you understand how you tie into the big picture. And then secondly, you can get ahead of finding new opportunities if you understand the things that are coming down the pike. So that was a lot. I've been talking a long time, and I left my water over there, which is sad. But all of this is to, again, assure you that this is normal. Just don't forget, this is normal. This is where we are, and this is where we'll be again. But the most important thing is you got this. Thanks.